there's a really systematic way to go from this rush of ideas or visions or memories or just an idea for a novel or a screenplay or a memoir that comes out pouring out to it being something really tight without losing your voice or its juiciness or whatever. But I think that's what gives writers hope, is that none of us know what we're doing until we finish the first draft. And then the second draft is really fun.
Good writing. Neil, you created this collection of rules for improving your sentences. Tell me a bit about the origin.
Yeah, the origin is, so these are rules that I started to pick up when I was a journalist. And so the assumption in these rules is that you've got a grammatical sentence. How do you make that sentence better in the sense of being able to better persuade the reader to read the next sentence that follows and the next sentence that follows? And the difference between somebody who looks at themselves fundamentally as a writer and somebody who looks at themselves as a subject matter expert who writes is that the writer is actually more interested in the sentence than the content. So to be interested in the sentence means to notice that it has a lot of possibilities after it's grammatical. And I started picking, the first rule I picked up from a really helpful editor was write with your verbs. Right? If you use a vivid verb instead of a dull verb, if you use trudged instead of walking, you pull the reader in better. And that was my start, and that was very useful. And then I started to collect other rules, question transitions, prefer Anglo-Saxon brutal short words over Latinate long complicated words. And eventually I noticed I had, first 4 or 5 and then 8 or 10. And a few years ago, I noticed I had gotten, more than a few years ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I noticed I had gotten up to about 30 or so such rules. And one day I looked around and looked for who else has rules. Maybe I can add to these, And I was kind of astonished because a lot of writers had lists of these kind of rules on how to improve a sentence, how to make it better. But they were, Hemingway had 4 rules and Elmore Leonard had 8 and Margaret Atwood has 10. The most that I saw out there was Martin Amis had 15, right? And I was like, but they're more than that. And then I looked around, is there a book that collects them? And that's how books get written, is you see that book isn't already out there, and it tugged at me. And so my interest in writing the book was to write a book that hadn't been written before. And then my interest when writing the book was, as it is for a lot of us, the fun of writing one sentence after another. So Annie and I look at each other more or less as people who make sentences. And this, I just thought, this book isn't out there. Let's see whether we can get it out there.
I noticed as I was reading Good Writing, I was like, I don't think I can ever write another sentence as long as I live. After writing this book, I'm all in a knot. I don't even know if I can speak a sentence. But then as I got to the conclusion, and Annie, you wrote about this notion of having 3 drafts, and I felt liberated to use these tools. So I wonder if you can explain that idea of the 3 drafts.
Well, I wrote a whole book about it, bird by bird, that basically I think encourages people, because none of the writers they love write good first drafts. No one knows what they're doing until they finish the first draft. Really, I can't think of it. Muriel Spark, the great English World War II writer, felt that she had dictaphone headsets on and was taking dictation from God. But first of all, that's such a very angry thing to say and aggressive. But if that was true, why would you say it to other writers? But most of us write really god-awful first drafts. Neil really doesn't, because he was a journalist for 15 years. Because he's always under deadline, right? But the rest of us write a really terrible first draft. I said in Bird by Bird that it was the child's draft. You just get it all down, and it's way too long, and the prose is too purple, and you use overly long descriptions and whatnot. And then the second draft is the grown-ups draft, and you go through. It's like Dr. Spock, the pediatrician, said to mothers with 2-year-olds, you must be firm and friendly. And you go through and you're firm and friendly, and you say, this really doesn't go there, and let's save it for somewhere else, which means you're not, it's getting cut. And you go through and and the second draft is really fun. That's sort of what you're in it for, is that you take something that was 10,000 words and you bring it down to the 5,000 that it will really end up being. And then the third draft is the dental draft. You sort of go tooth by tooth, and that's paragraph by paragraph or passage by passage or sentence by sentence. You wiggle them and jiggle them, and you poke them, and you see if anything needs help. Sometimes they're just fine and healthy. Other times they need a cleaning. Other times they need, and so there's a really systematic way to go from this rush of ideas or visions or memories or just an idea for a novel or a screenplay or a memoir that comes out pouring out to it being something really tight without losing your voice or its juiciness or whatever. But I think that's what gives writers hope, is that none of us know what we're doing until we finish the first draft. And then the second draft is really fun.
And that's really where these rules of writing for
Yes.
most people come in terms of their application. is
Yes.
The second draft and the dental draft.
Yes.
Yeah, we say that. We say this is a book about second drafts. Bird by Bird is about a book about how do I make myself a writer and get into the first draft. And this is really a second draft. Much more technical than Bird by Bird. Bird by Bird is much more fluidly about a process. And and because it's technical, my problem was I didn't want to write a technical manual like a grammarian might, which makes it sound like everything's right and wrong. And these rules can be broken, and you can argue with them, and they are not right and wrong. They are rhetoric and persuasion. And everybody's got a different way of using persuasion. And so I didn't feel like that kind of expert. I felt like they were useful to me. And so I tried to write just what came top of my head about my experience with using these as more or less a user's manual rather than a technical manual, maybe.
Now, you shared these rules with Annie towards the beginning of your time together dating. What was your response, Annie, when you looked at this
Well,
rule
I
book?
think I think he shared them with me on our 4th or 5th date. So this is 10 years ago. And I was amazed. I mean, I thought they were great. Some of them obviously I knew, but they were written down in a way that had structure and it was concise and just brilliant. And so I started giving them out to all of my students at my writing workshops and whatnot. And then a couple of years ago, Neil put them into a book and did these meditations on them, and these little essays on each rule with a lot of examples. Now, Neil we're just very different stylistically. He's really organized mentally, and he can be professorial, and he has a lot of brilliant examples. I mean, he'll bring up Socrates very casually in a conversation about, Jean-Benet Ramsey or something. And then I'm more like the den mother for the 3rd graders. So I bring in the cupcakes and I say, I really want you to consider doing this. I think you can do it. There's a lot of help available. Your voice is important. You're important. And so I looked at his book and I loved it. But I said, hey, you know what? I know something about writing too. And Mr. Man. And so I asked if I could contribute my responses to his essays and my own examples. So that's how it all came about. But so after, all of a sudden, he had them posted at his website, shapesoftruth.com. And I was just referring people to him. I was saying, just go to shapesoftruth.com. You'll find the rules, and people were just blown away by him. That's how we both knew we were on to something.
it turned out that that difference in style really lucked out, because the way Annie decided that she might horn in on this book is respond to each of my essays. So it's a call and response where she always gets the last word, which she likes a lot. And in
Yes.
some cases, she disagrees with the rule. And so she gets the last word on the rule. But it works with our style because I'm an explainer. And my greatest fault in writing is I over-explain, right? And so that's just what I do. I kind of look at things and kind of try to put them together and find patterns and explain why the pattern works and that sort of thing. And Annie's cathartic, right? She connects in a different way with the reader so that the reader can, and the way it works in the book is that, and it was just serendipity, that by my going first, her going second, you get the rule, you get an explanation of the rule, and then you get kind of a coach helping you feel comfortable with the rule.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
the dead mother who says, "Go ahead, break the
Yeah.
rule."
Plus,
And-
you
yeah.
get to end on humor because she's much funnier than I
Right.
am.
And also, I have a very strong spiritual interest in people writing because I feel, and it's all through good writing, my feeling that if you want to write and you don't get around to it, it's just going to plague you. It's going to hurt you at the end of your life that you wanted to get your memories down both for your grandchildren and just for your own self. And you wanted to tell this novel that you started in college, but that life interfered and you had a family and you had a job and now you're 65 and Neil's inner critic is telling you it's too late to start or there's no way that you could da-da-da-da-da. And so my spiritual influence, I think, is to say, this is really about your heart and your soul, that you find a way to get a little bit of work done every day. And these are some of the hacks we use to get our own work done.
Discover on-demand videos and docuseries, explore a full schedule of daily life classes, and become part of an incredible community. At Sounds True One, we invite you inward to find your way your way.